It's daylight outside at 6:30. How weird is this?
This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, everyone. I was to see if we could get Councilor Carey on the line before we started, but head call to order the Tuesday, March 16th meeting of the Monmouth City Council. And we will start Phyllis Bowman, our city recorder, and have her do the roll call, please.
Councilor Beltz.
Here.
Councilor Carey.
Here.
Councilor Lopez.
Here.
Councilor McKeel.
Here.
Councilor Oberst.
Here.
Councilor Salinas Oliveros.
Here.
Mayor Kuntz.
I am here. And for the flag salute this evening, Roxanne, will you please lead us in that?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Tonight, I know we have some presenters with us, but in the event that anyone here is for public comment online, I'll let you know that we do have time set aside for that, and we will, comments from the community will be entertained. We ask that folks let Phyllis Bowman know in the chat if you would like to speak. And these comments will be limited to 3 minutes, but I think everybody who's with us tonight is here with the presentation group. And here in the room, we again have our report from the Itemizer Observer. So we will go forward with the consent calendar. Tonight, you should have had in your packet the minutes of the meeting of March 2nd, including both our regular meeting and our council work session. And if there were no corrections or additions to those minutes, I'll ask for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Oberst and Councilor Beltz. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? Doesn't look like it. Thank you. Just a minute. For the mayor's report this evening, I just have a couple of quick things. One is, first of all, I will take mayor's privilege and wish my only child a happy 31st birthday. So to JC Heidi, happy birthday to my little girl. I have had the privilege this week of speaking to a couple of groups, including our Central Lions Club. I met with them last night and got a chance to catch them up on things going on in the city. Some great questions from that group, as we might expect. And I've also have recorded an interview with KMUZ Radio. That will be broadcast on Friday, and then a link will be made available to that. And the main topic of conversation with Michael Rose on his Polk County report was our City Hall project. So had a great opportunity to speak to him. And one other thing I was in on this week, we had a Salem Hospital is doing a call every couple of weeks with community members, including leaders of businesses and nonprofits and some elected officials, and really catching up on what their efforts around coronavirus and COVID-19. And they were really pleased to be able to announce that last week, Salem Health alone has administered 100,000 COVID-19 vaccines. So absolutely amazing work by the hospital, both in Salem and in Dallas, and at their clinics and these mass vaccine clinics they're running. Again, really setting a tone. So good news, Polk County, we're getting there. And with that, I will ask for any reports from boards and commissions. And Councillor Belts, then Councillor Salinas Oliveros.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a report for the Library Board. Beginning Wednesday, March 17th, the library will begin allowing a limited number of people at a time into the library for brief browsing and checking out library materials. Patrons will be allowed in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from between 10 and 4, following safety guidelines. They will limit the number of people allowed at a time. They must wear proper face masks. They're asking people to limit their time in the library to 20 minutes, with the exception of 30 minutes if you're on the computer. Restrooms still closed, no exceptions. Please follow safety distance. Mask and hand sanitizer will be provided. Limited number of computers available. Curbside pickup is still continuing. People will be greeted at the door and handed a flyer with all safety guidelines. They're counting on everyone's cooperation, which will help us so we can continue safely providing in-library service. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Councillor Salinas Oliveros and Councillor Oberst.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. On the 3rd of March, the Historic Commission met, and really our conversation centered around Historic Preservation Month that is coming up in May, and we talked about different celebration ideas and what we would be doing. And I was fortunate enough to give a presentation only because I didn't show, but I'm glad that I was able to fill in. And we talked about, and I shared about the Monmouth Independence History Project, and shared the timeline, our mission, our vision, and then we talked about, and the Historic Commission is gracious enough to consider they're looking at combining if they do like a scavenger hunt and brochures, that they may put in some of the timeline information about Monmouth as well in the brochure. And so we talked about, having the scavenger hunt, having maybe pictures taken, maybe enter for a drawing or something that the community can get involved in. And then we talked about some other different ideas to do around Historic Preservation Celebration Month. And we talked a little bit about opening up applications for our mural project and formalizing that. And then also about how to share with the community, how can we share what the Historic Commission is doing in a better way that our community members can be involved and ask questions and see all the good work that this commission has done and what we continue to do. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Oberst and then Councillor Lopez.
Parks Commission on the 10th. So at the end, during this fiscal year, current fiscal year, there was leftover grant money that was aimed at buying a bike rack for General Woods Park. We were going to buy that from a local vendor. That arrangement has fallen through. I'm not clear on the details. Russ didn't really go into it. However, we do still have the high-wheeled bicycle bike rack that used to be in front of the former bike shop downtown. And Russ is going to look at, can we, between now and the end of June, get that refurbished and re-powder coated and tagged and in the park. So that's a fallback position. He's also going to continue to research other options. Skate park update. The single biggest item is that they are going to be going out for detailed construction plans and cost estimates. Big part of that is so that they can start seeking grants and in-kind donations. I mentioned they've gotten an in-kind promise of the rebar they will need. And, you got to cover it with concrete, and there's holes to dig and everything else. So, get a more concrete estimate and hope we can get some, and see if we can get some action going there. I also mentioned a time or two ago, the grant applications for this year were coming in very slowly, and there was an outreach push which resulted in a record 9 applications, including one from a young man who goes to West Salem High School and lives outside Dallas. Those have been processed, and the commission worked through them and has awarded 5 of them. I have not checked with Russ to make sure that I could announce who got what, so I'm not going to do that and leave that up to Russ and the Parks Commission, because it's their grants. So the next meeting is on the 21st, and I think that's it. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of the council, I have a report from the Mid-Willamette Valley Homeless Alliance Board of Directors. And the board did meet, as did the ORS 190 entity. I won't bore you with the details of planning for the budgeting process, which we're embarking as well on as well. But I will share with you a little bit about the Built for Zero initiative. We received a really wonderful presentation on Built for Zero. The Continuum of Care region has joined Built for Zero, and what Built for Zero is it's a really it's a systemic way of trying to get to zero homelessness in specific populations. It's a program that's utilized in many other places, and you know, just like many issues when we're dealing with homelessness, there's a lot of considerations and concerns about how to address the issue. As such, Built for Zero is an equally complex, although digestible, answer to at least parts of that. I won't try to recreate the presentation here because I'm certainly not qualified to speak to that. But I will note that it's a wonderful program that you know, the Continuum of Care has joined that initiative, and we learned a lot more about, you know, about how that can be impactful in our communities. In other notes on that, there is growing, you know, growing interest in the creation of a rural communities subcommittee on this board. We did not deal with this in the latest meeting, but I will encourage any listeners out there that might be in any way interested in helping or involved in serving the you know, the houseless community to please reach out to me if there's interest in learning more about this potential subcommittee. It's something that's on the burner here for the spring to see if we can't get something organized. So that concludes my report from the Homeless Alliance. John, did you have a question for me, or are you waiting to go next?
He has a report.
Whenever my turn comes up.
It's your turn, Councillor Carey.
Okay, very quickly, Madam Mayor, members of the council, the Planning Commission sort of sponsored an open house to discuss the code updates that we've been talking about, and that was on the 11th. I did not attend that. Perhaps Marty will have something on that, or Suzanne later. But what I did want to note is that there's an online survey for the code update project where the public can provide additional feedback and encourage others to participate. There's a link, I believe it's on the website, the city website, and that is open until March 26th. Not sure how much interest that this is getting because, you know, it's sort of like speaking in tongues when you're talking code. So it's a little difficult, but I would suggest if you have thoughts on it to please weigh in. And Rebecca, just let me put this little bug in your ear. I think in 2022, in October, that'll be the 60th anniversary of the Columbus Day storm. And we mentioned that the other day, a meeting or so back. Betty Plude has put together a really quite a nice book, a pamphlet about what happened in Monmouth and the people that were here. With some time, it might be fun to pursue that. I'd be happy to share the book with you, and there's other sources, but I found it to be an interesting read and might be fun.
No, that's great, since a photograph from Monmouth is one of the iconic shots of that particular event in some of our young lives that lived here at that time. All right, thank you all very much for that. And we did have 2 applications to boards and commissions that I hope you got a look at. Keith Tierney has applied for the Senior Advisory Board, and Keith's interests including working on a lot of senior rights issues. He was the director of senior legal services in another state and has advised senior centers. And although limited amount of information, certainly seems like he'll be a great addition to our board. And the other well-qualified applicant for a board and commission, we have had a resignation on the Arts and Culture Commission board, and we got a great applicant. Sharon Stokes Oberst is a retired professor of dance at Western Oregon University, but more than that, she has been involved in arts organizations, in representative organizations, doing advocacy, doing organizational things. Extremely qualified applicant for that position. So I would enjoy if I could receive a motion to nominate these 2 qualified candidates. Counselor Oberst.
Would it be a conflict for me to either make that motion or vote on it?
I don't believe so. Unfortunately, this is an unpaid position. There is absolutely no financial benefit or avoidance of financial detriment to your family from your wife serving on the Arts and Council Commission.
Therefore, I would move approval of both of these candidates for boards and commissions.
And I'll second that.
Thank you, Counselor Oberst, for the motion, and Counselor Lopez for the second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Thank
Aye.
you all very much. We'll get the word out to those folks and have them bring great new expertise to our boards and commissions. And with that, I will turn it over to Marty Wine for our city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, Mayor and Council. I just have 3 quick items for the city manager's report, and I'll save some of my other news for Friday notes for later in the week regarding some of our department updates. Although you heard many of the highlights in your board and commission reports tonight. A couple of weeks ago, I asked the council for some feedback about your preferences about the way we are holding meetings and how we're using our time. And I just wanted to note to you that beginning on April 6th, we'll start to put a few changes into place for the way we're structuring our agendas, and also the way we're going to, by structuring the agenda, what I mean is the order of how we'll go through some things during the council meeting. The 2 major changes that you probably can expect to see is in the order of the agenda, where our hope is to put the folks who are presenting who are not from city staff or city council up in the front of the agenda and order those at the beginning of the agenda, and then put the reports such as we've just been all engaging in at the end of the agenda. So that the idea is to try to be polite to our presenters and make sure that they're not sitting through our whole meeting while we're dealing with other items of business. And I think we're going to continue to have both work session items and business meeting items on an agenda. So we won't be splitting those, which was a proposal, but some of you talked about entertaining. So you'll also see on the agenda, we're going to try in a way to tighten up the time by noting the amount of time something is going to take on the agenda so that everybody knows what to expect. And some of this will rely on staff preparing ahead of time to give you complete presentations or getting you ahead of time. So just a heads up that you'll be seeing just some minor changes to the agenda, but it's all in the name of trying to use our time as wisely as possible. Let's see, 2 other notes for you. I also participated today in a radio interview for KMUZ. Very similar to the mayor's. I talked with Michael Rose about our City Hall project primarily. And so, you know, our hope, I'll be talking with you later tonight with a briefing about how we're planning to communicate about our City Hall project. And so that was, I saw that as sort of like the starting point for really increasing our communication in these 2 months before the levy is voted on by Monmouth voters. And then Suzanne Duffner and I participated last week in a phone call with Western Oregon University staff and us. Just at my request, I reached out to President Rex Fuller when I first arrived in town and asked him how the city and the university could be better partners. And we had a very productive brainstorming session about the ways that we might be able to work together on joint projects in the future. So I just wanted to note that that's happening in addition to the University City Connections Committee that still meets regularly. And also we've got lots of sort of idea generating going on in that regard. So I'm looking forward to future partnership projects with the university, as I know have happened in the past. That's all I have for tonight's report.
Thank you. Any questions for Marty? Phyllis, did we receive any public comments either prior to the meeting or on this call?
We did not, Mayor Kuntz.
Thank you so much. That moves us to our business agenda. And our first item, I believe, Suzanne Duffner has brought forth an issue for us. Suzanne.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, members of the City Council. I do have a staff report, which includes a request to initiate an amendment to the Monmouth City Code. The city received a letter from a local developer for residential land in Monmouth, requesting that the City Council consider initiating this change to our city codes, specifically regarding an issue of the setbacks, the side yard setbacks for new houses that are built in the low density residential zone district. So this is a setback, for those who may not be familiar, is a distance from the property line to the structure on the side of the house. Right now our code requires a 15-foot overall setback between the 2 side yards. One side only can be a minimum of 5 feet, which would leave the other at a minimum of 10 feet. And the request is to drop that down to a 10-foot overall side yard setback with 5-foot minimum on each side. And it wouldn't have any change to corner lots, which would still have the 15-foot setback. They have a 10-foot street yard setback on the street side. So by way of process, our city code requires the council to initiate changes to our code. And then once it's been initiated by the city council, then we schedule the public hearing. So there's 2 public hearings. There's one before the Planning Commission and one before the council. And we provide notice through the local newspaper of those hearings to allow for public comment on the issue. And then if the code change is approved, then it becomes official through adoption of an ordinance. Staff estimates processing this code change would take probably about 15 to 20 staff hours to be able to process that with the notice preparation and the staff report writing and preparing the findings for it. There's not a huge direct cost. Basically, our only direct cost is through the newspaper advertisement that we're required to file with the Polk Itemizer. So it may bump into some of the priority projects that we've been trying to work on, but it shouldn't be a large staff time because it's such a limited code change that we'd be looking at. And then I noted in there that this code change is actually something that we had flagged to look at in the current code update project that we got a grant for. So it's a little unusual. We've worked in a number of small cities throughout the region, and definitely the standard setback is a 10-foot setback with 5-foot minimum on either side. But it is a local preference issue, policy issue, and how that setback gets decided. And there are some building codes in place that make a minimum setback that we have to follow. But in terms of exactly where that gets set, we do have some local flexibility there. So I put together some of the alternatives. You can either choose to initiate the code amendment tonight based on the request that you've received. Or a second alternative would be to wait to process the code change just as part of the overall code update project that we're working on that we got the grant for. That would delay, the impact of that is that it would delay the actual implementation and being able to use that reduced setback for new buildings, new homes by quite a bit, because the code update project probably won't result in adoption until later into 2022, since we're still at the first phase of that project. And then a third option is you always have the option to take no action on the request. So I put a proposed sample motion there when you're ready for that, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions you have about it.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And I had one question, which you did address, and that is, where would this typically come in the process of approving a development? Because we all know that project's been underway for quite some time, so I appreciate the staff report addressing it. There is an option to request a certain kind of development that allows those variances to the code, as I read it, as part of the development, and that's to have a PUD, right?
Correct. Yes.
So having that planned unit development, this would be moot, because a planned unit development would have it in the actual development agreement. And so didn't think about it at the time, and now we are looking at this change, right?
Yeah, I think the disconnect came, the builder isn't necessarily building on all the lots. So once the builders came into play, they were like noticing that, wow, these are kind of tight lots to be able to fit primarily single family homes, that can serve an aging demographic to have one level. So, I honestly, I think it's a reasonable request. Usually when you have larger lots and larger setbacks, that can lead to more expensive housing because it takes more land to accomplish that. But like I said, it is a city preference on where those exact numbers get set for the setbacks.
Great, thank you. And Councillor Oberst.
So I was chair of planning when this current arrangement was put into place, and the idea at that time was actually trying to lower density a little bit and give people a little bit more elbow room in their homes. I'm not sure that a whole lot has been built, frankly, in that interim in single family since that was passed. I know the southeast corner of Cooper's View along Talmadge Road, there's like 6 houses there that were put in under this standard versus the 5-foot standard that existed before. Don't know if anybody's aware of that. It does have kind of a different feel. With that said, we also seem to be moving in Oregon in general, and perhaps with our code review, toward increasing density all around anyway. So I just put those two facts on the table for council's consideration, that it was done deliberately, but maybe it's time to deliberate on that deliberately. So.
Other questions or thoughts? Councillor Carey, and then Councillor McKeel.
I guess my question would be, why doesn't this go to the Planning Commission first? I would like to have a little bit more discussion on it. Councillor Oberst has provided some interesting detail there, but I mean, this is I mean, it seems that we're moving in that direction with this density craze, increasing our density. I don't know that this really deals much with density. The lots lines are already drawn. It's just going to allow, you know, crowding on the sites, which, you know, may or may not be a problem. And I recognize and appreciate the desire for single story versus everything being two-story. I guess I'm sort of surprised I would like to see this go to the Planning Commission for some discussion and not necessarily be bound to the code amendment thing, but these people Planning Commission deals with this kind of stuff all the time. And to me, that would be a good step. Ask that it be expedited. And, you know, I'm happy to move on it quickly, but it seems to me there's a step that we've jumped over.
Suzanne, you mentioned that we always need to initiate these.
Yeah, and actually, by our code, the Planning Commission can also initiate a code amendment. And so, either body can do that. It's generally, I think, since they're an advisory body to the council, we want to make sure that we're tracking, since council ultimately makes the final decision on this. So I guess that was my.
If builders who are having a tough time with that might not dig a little deeper into their file cabinets to find a different floor plan that would fit. That's just my kind of lean on it from you on if counselors were in the east corner of town and see what it looks like when you have these wider setbacks. Would that constitute a site visit for future purposes or not? I just wanted to point out those houses are there, and is that a problem?
No, you'd be okay. This is a legislative amendment. It's not a quasi judicial application.
Great. Thanks for that, because I drive by them every day on my way to work, so I'd have to try to avert my eyes now. Thank you. Councillor Salinas Oliveros.
Yes, I just, two things. So we're looking at, and we're going to be looking at that later, some of our statements and the equitably, being equitable and looking at the affordable housing and looking at policies that might be barriers to fulfilling what we want. And not sure this even plays a part in that. But wondering, hearing from Ms. Steffner that this is something that was flagged to be looked at, and wondering if that was something that goes with the presentation with the community, with the affordable housing, about the state and what the state is doing and how we need to maybe to go and change some of those, looking at our codes. And so I'm wondering, in that sense, is this going to be a policy or something that's going to stand in the way of the affordable housing type goals, is one. And then also, yeah, it's not a whole lot of space, as Councilor Oberst was explaining, but I'm wondering, does that also discourage some builders from building? And will we be missing out on some potential builders who maybe who want to have this code or this amendment initiated? I don't know. Either way, it could go either way.
Yeah, great comments, Councillor Salinas Oliveros, and questions. So I think just to respond to, would this change kind of help support some of the affordable housing goals that we're trying to move towards? I mean, single family detached, it's hard to say that there's an affordable single family detached home, especially in the Mid-Valley. I mean, that's, that we know that there are challenges with that rate, but there is definitely a relationship between the sizes of the lots and the price points that they're at. So, if we keep this setback standard in place, it could drive developers to make the lots wider than the minimum and larger than the minimum, rather than making them, as the smaller size as possible. So I think that there is a potential impact, but I don't want to make you think that just by changing this as well, that we're going to have 100% more affordable housing. So, but I think to your second comment about, will this discourage other builders from building in Monmouth? It could. I think it'll require the builders to search for potentially other building plan styles than what they might have already had. And it's, I think some of it, what the developer was trying to go for by having different builders in the same subdivision, was to provide a little bit more variety, so you didn't get the same 3 house plans over and over again, which, from a design aesthetic standpoint, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of that variety. So yeah, hopefully that responded to a couple of your questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Councillor Oberst from just my understanding of the project, that this will not be designed as an affordable housing project. And if we don't do this, then there'll be more two-story homes on the property, because those are the kinds of homes that they're building, the square footage they'd be looking at, I think. So I agree that I think the major goal of this is to provide some more age-in-place housing, which is also an attractive feature for communities. So I'm not sure that this particular development, even if we made them wait until we completed all of our code amendments, which is probably not realistic, would result in new affordable housing types that are currently not here. That's not the plan. That's not the business model, as far as I understand. So I think the issue is literally, again, it's been pointed out, this is something that would be discussed in our overall code plan amendments. Do we want to move this forward a little bit to assist this particular developer who has been working on his property quite a while, or have, let the process go a little longer, get a little more feedback, a little more insight, by either having the planning commission review it first before and make a recommendation back to us, or by putting it off to be part of the overall amendment. So I think those are the questions. I'll take quick comments from Councilor Oberst and Councilor Carey, and then
My comment is simply, I don't know if this counts as initiate code amendment, but I would ask planning to have a look at this. I'd move that we pass this off to the planning commission for their input to give us some guidance.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded to refer this to the planning commission and ask them to consider it as soon as they can, and then give that feedback back to us. Suzanne, what would that process look like?
I just wanted to clarify, so that would include like the public hearing, so they're actually getting public feedback at that as well, correct? Okay.
So they
This
would
wasn't
do,
sure.
yeah, they would do
Yeah.
the hearing process
Okay.
and
And
everything
then,
rather.
okay.
Well, if I can, just for my clarification then, are you authorizing them to go ahead and propose a code amendment in this, or do you want them to come back to you first with just a recommendation and then possibly initiate, making sure that they're operating within the guidelines you want to give them?
I think my initial idea was to have them give us guidance as to whether this change is warranted, but I would stand for a friendly amendment to suggest that they just jump into the process, either way.
You get your motion, and then Councilor Carey gets to decide on his second.
Yeah, I'm in concurrence with that. I wouldn't. I'm anxious for a recommendation from them, and I'm anxious for it fairly soon so we can be sensitive to the developer. So, but I feel like they deal with it all the time. So my second, I believe, is altered with Councilor Oberst's sort of amendment to his motion.
I'm sorry, see, it's just again, so I can be perfectly clear. So you are authorizing the planning commission to initiate a code amendment. You're not directing them to. Is that it? If they want to go ahead, they can come back to you with a proposed ordinance or a proposed amendment?
My motion would be for them to tell us if they think it's warranted. And as I said, I would be willing to be amended by another counselor to say if they want, feel that it is warranted and initiate a process and I would have to defer to Councilor Carey on whether his second stands in that case.
Okay, so you weren't amending your motion.
I am not amending my motion. I'm deferring to Councilor.
You just want a recommendation.
Yeah.
Whether to initiate or not to initiate a code amendment.
Right. We think this is worthy of starting a process or not.
Okay.
simply because they're going to be looking at it regardless in the long term, probably. And so to that, I would be curious to know they feel like this is worthy of jumping ahead with this particular piece of the long-term, bigger picture code amendment process.
And then would we then be the initiator? I mean, this is a technical thing. I'm anxious in a recommendation from the Planning Commission in the most expedient way that we can get it.
So Councillor Carey, what your second is at the moment is to get a recommendation from the Planning Commission as to whether or not they would like us to initiate the change. And
Correct.
okay.
Yeah.
So everyone knows that's all we're doing is referring it to them. They would come back to us and say, go ahead and initiate it. And then we will go through the hearings process. We will direct staff to go through the code amendment process, go through the hearings process, and then make a decision. That's what we're voting on at this moment.
Suzanne, are you clear?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so all in favor of that, please signify by saying aye.
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 And any opposed? All right, thank you. So we'll take that to Planning Commission, get that on an agenda. Hopefully they can discuss that very soon and advise us as to what they would like to see us do next. Okay, thank you. And with that, we do have, thank you very much, Suzanne. We have a presentation this evening from the Monmouth Independence Climate Action Task Force. We've had a brief visit with them earlier, and they've been doing some excellent work. And I will turn this over. I don't know, Marty, or you or Suzanne have been working.
I can say a
Okay.
few opening words just
Great.
to the council, and council, in your staff report, what I've tried to do is outline the path that we've been on, both to talk with the Monmouth Independence Community Climate Task Force, and also your recent discussion in priority setting related to sustainability. You'll be talking about the priority setting and value statements related to this later in the evening. But we have members of the task force who are here tonight who would like to talk with you about requests that they made of the council last year. And as I mentioned, does align with some of the current priorities that we are talking about. So during priority settings, we discussed a proposal to fund a community action plan with a potential in the upcoming budget to fund such a study. My hope is that tonight, together with the requests made by the task force and that priority in mind, that you can have a discussion together with the task force members about how you'd like to go forward. The specific actions that the task force requested back in November included a recognition of the climate crisis through the adoption of a resolution, and a draft of that proposal is in your packet tonight. There are steps that can be taken probably in the context of a climate action plan for reducing municipal greenhouse gas emissions, which was another request of the task force. That's in the proposed resolution. The other thing that the task force was suggesting, that maybe a joint board between the two cities of Monmouth and Independence, who could recommend and advise to the council the local actions that could, the kinds of actions that would address the climate crisis, and then also developing and adopting a climate action plan, which is something that you all discussed during priority setting. So not to belabor this, I'd like for you to have a conversation with our task force members who are here tonight. Stephen Howard, Mr. Howard, good evening. And my hope is that we can take some guidance from your discussion about what you want the next steps to be.
Council, Mayor, and city staff. I know we've got a couple of different things that we can talk about, and I know you have a larger sustainability conversation going on at council. we brought this resolution to you last fall, hoping that this would sort of kick off the process of the two communities here working together to work on our carbon footprint and secure a more sustainable and healthy future for all of us. Manager Wine has asked in some correspondence about what other cities are doing and what sorts of actions we might be looking for. And I've gone ahead and put together some slides to talk about that. I do want to say that while these are all ideas that we think are good, ultimately the whole idea of having a joint commission with Independence and Monmouth is to bring these sorts of suggestions to the councils to act upon. So we may be doing a little bit of putting the cart before the horse here tonight, but I know that everybody's curious about what exactly it means for two small towns to do something about climate. So if I can get permission to run a presentation, I will run through this short slide deck and then we can have a discussion. Software's going to make me jump through some hoops. Hang on a moment. Make this as quick as I can. Let's see if it lets me do that now. Okay, it's going to ask me to restart. This should be quick. I apologize. All right, with those settings changed, let's see if I can show you these slides. Doesn't look like I have permission to present quite yet. I'll do it without slides if I need to. I don't know, Phyllis, have you tried enabling my ability to present or not yet?
Well, I can't enable you on both screens or both. There's two of you now.
Oh no.
Let me try
Oh,
the
no.
other
All right. Thank you. Yeah, give this one more go.
To Stephen Howard's, will the world be safe?
Watch out, there might be three of me in a second. This is not why I'm a software developer. All right, well, if my screen share permissions show up, I will start actually presenting this, but otherwise I'm just going to talk you through it. We all got a lot to talk about. So
I made you presenter. You should have seen that. That means you hit the screen share button down at the bottom of your screen.
yeah, it's still grayed out. I'm afraid my multiple selves are causing you problems.
I have 3 Stephen Howards now.
That's what I was worried about.
I'll try
As
one more time.
The presenter. One of
There we
them
go.
says Stephen Howard presenter.
I
Right.
am ready.
It's offline.
I changed that.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
All right, great. Thank you for your patience. All right, so the whole point of this not only is to talk about solving climate change as how as best we can, is but to actually make it achievable for a community our size. There's a few different ways we can talk about this tonight. As I mentioned, what are other small cities doing in Oregon that we might model off of? What sorts of principles ought we be holding while we're talking about these solutions? And then your city manager asked for some examples of the sorts of actions that might be appropriate. So I've got 8 examples here tonight. So how are the other small cities in Oregon responding? I've got 4 examples here. We've got Silverton, which is a population about our size. In 2019 and 2020, they held a whole year on sustainability. They worked with some students from the U of O and one of their professors to generate some reports, which culminated in a recommendations document in September of 2020, which focused on 6 different areas. You'll find a lot of these different reports will have different focus areas: land use, transportation, buildings. There's a lot of overlap from city to city, so people are hitting on a lot of the same problems and solutions. Hood River, which is the smallest, adopted a climate resolution in 2019, which actually the resolution before you tonight is very similar to theirs. Being a small community, they have adopted their county's energy program, which has an emphasis on climate and local energy production. They have declared a net zero emissions target by 2035. We've got Ashland, Oregon. I included a couple larger communities because, of course, we're suggesting that this should be a joint project for Independence and Monmouth together. So Ashland had an action plan established in 2017, and then established a commission to help enact and guide the process in 2019. Their net zero goal is 2050. And then Milwaukee has a climate action plan that they started in 2018, and their plan is to revisit that every 3 years to keep it up to date. Their resolution passed in 2020. They called it their climate emergency resolution as opposed to a climate crisis resolution. And their goal is to be carbon neutral by 2045. So while we consider what we might do, it's important that we establish the values and principles that we hold while we're considering solutions and what works for our community. I have a few suggested here, but obviously the cities and the Joint Commission ought to make this some of their early work. The first thing to note, of course, is that fossil fuels, while useful, but the point of using them was never using them for the sake of burning fossil fuels. That wasn't the point. The point was to heat our homes, cook our food, get to work. In business, this kind of thinking process is called the jobs to be done framework. The classic example that everybody in business likes to use is when people buy a drill, it's not because they want a drill, it's because they want a hole in the wall. So if you can really identify what it is that people want, you can then consider the alternative ways that they might get what they want. And so what we're really talking about when we're talking about climate solutions is finding replacements for the carbon emissions, not replacements for the activities and services that people value. Something else to note, a big push in climate conversations right now is about electrification. There's a lot of things that the technology is already there for to take things that we use fossil fuels for every day. Everybody jumps to cars, but there's a lot of other places we use fossil fuels for, of course, where we already have existing solutions that are electric. And then if you clean your electricity grid, which we are very fortunate to have a fairly clean electricity grid to start with, then that buys you climate reductions by electrifying. Of course, if you're moving all of these fossil fuel uses to electrification, then you're going to need a lot more electricity, which is one of the big places where efficiency comes in. Efficiency isn't really a goal in and of itself, but it makes moving away from fossil fuels that much easier. There is sadly, of course, things that are already happening due to climate change. And for the well-being of our communities, it's important that we take steps to manage those effects as best we can, whether that's severe weather events or whether it's just day-to-day living. Things will get more difficult and we'll have to do something about it. And finally, it's no good to talk about climate solutions if they're either too expensive or too complicated for the community members to live with or implement or sign up for. If we leave people behind, not only will you get pushback, not only will it be unfair, but we won't solve the problem. So solutions have to work for the people with the least means as much as it does for the people with the most. So those are 4 principles that I thought would be a good way to start the discussion. But what probably everybody's super curious about is some actual steps that we can take as a small city. So here are 8. There are many, many others, but these have a broad, serves as a survey, a broad range of topics that can be considered. The first is probably the boldest. There are many cities in the US and around the world who are talking about eliminating new fossil fuel uses in their buildings in particular. There are some that have already passed ordinances that require no natural gas lines to new construction. The logic, of course, being that we gotta stop the bleeding before we can move in the right direction. So there, as I said earlier, there are already existing affordable technologies for replacing hot water heaters, stoves, heat pumps for heat instead of furnaces that are already in common use. And this wouldn't be a big lift for developers, I don't believe. And it would buy us time to tackle the existing fossil fuel uses that already exist in our communities. I was told at a recent meeting that not everybody knows what the urban heat island is. Very briefly, cities tend to, based on the surfaces of their roads and their roofs and other built environment materials, be significantly warmer than their surroundings. This tends to increase demand for electricity, demand for cooling in the summer. They don't cool off as readily at night. And so you'll get increased needs for air conditioning and power usage. And of course, people who don't have air conditioning or can't afford the higher electricity bills will be struggling as things get hotter. So there are simple things you can do to reduce the urban heat island effect. A lot of it is tree coverings near streets, lighter roofing materials, or roofing materials that don't absorb as much sunlight. Green roofs are a more unusual option, but they also work fantastically well as providing all of the plantings, both on roofs and trees, provide evaporative cooling for a city. Has worked with some local organizations for winter shelters when things drop to be very cold. We will probably need to also think about times for extreme heat, whether that's people who don't have a home or people who do not have or cannot afford air conditioning. The last 2 or 3 fire seasons have also shown us what happens to air quality due to the more frequent fires. So this will be something that we'll need to coordinate as a community. I struggled with the title for this slide, but came down to useful walkability. I know that on planning, we're actually doing a lot with the code revision grant to help improve getting people places more easily with less car dependence. But the idea is to put most of people's needs, daily needs, within a comfortable walk. Not that it's merely possible to walk, to school, to work, to pick up some light groceries, to meet a friend for coffee, but that it's actually desirable and comfortable to walk places. making walkability a big tentpole to your plan will make it possible for people to reduce their footprint without even asking them to replace their vehicles with something they may not be able to afford yet. We've been talking transit in these communities for a few years now. I know there's a study underway that Independence is leading. I was personally part of some of the early discussions around the trolley service, and so I am hoping something comes of that. But what transit is really good at is taking small pockets of walkability, neighborhoods where people can get to places they need to be, and helping supercharge that walkability and getting them to other walkable nodes. And doing so would reduce private vehicle traffic. Just gonna check. Okay. And then sort of both on a sustainability point of view, but also on an economic development point of view, I think it's very important that the city work with local developers and local skills tradespeople to cultivate local expertise. When we're talking about, say, increasing solar or changing how we build buildings to be radically more efficient, the people who work here and build here now have a certain set of skills, and we don't want to have to keep asking people to come from Portland to design our buildings. Or when I've talked to people about installing solar, the experts are there. Some of the closest ones are in Silverton. That adds to the costs of new construction. It adds to the costs of having tradespeople come from farther away. They build it right into their billing. And it also takes money out of the local economy that we could be paying people to do these improvements right here in their own backyard. Local solar and battery storage for electricity has multiple advantages. Not only does it reduce our demands for electricity outside of our local grid, and it's a nice, easy source of clean electricity, but in times of disaster, power outages, that earthquake we all keep hearing is coming, having local power generation would be a boon for the community, where we may be waiting a very long time to get back online. So how we accelerate solar and battery installs, some of it's going to be looking at regularizing our regulations and our permitting process with other communities so that there are no surprises for installers who come to put solar on people's roofs and batteries in people's garages. There may be things that local banks need to provide climate loans on favorable terms, because a lot of the things that solve the climate crisis tend to flip the costs, whereas the older way of doing business tends to be cheap up front and then a little more expensive over the long run. At least for now, a lot of solutions tend to be a bit more expensive up front and then cheaper in the long run. So there may be some financing that needs to happen or be made available to homeowners and property owners. And that is something that the city might be able to help arrange. And I'm, of course, very interested in knowing what Monmouth and Power and Light can do for us, since we are very fortunate to have our own local utility. Our good people and staff. And then finally, number 8, and this is going to be the long, slow, steady progress that would have to happen on top of everything else, is finding ways to help people retire their existing fossil fuel use. There are certain things that we simply can't mandate. Nobody's expecting a small town like ours to say everybody's going to buy an electric car. But what resources are out there for community members to weatherize their homes and swap out fossil fuel appliances for electric-based ones? What sort of rebates can they take advantage of? What sort of rebates can we offer since we do have a local utility? I'm sure there's dozens and dozens of ways to do this. And part of what the Joint Commission ought to be looking at is the most effective ways to do that, specifically with this community. Those are 8 ideas. I'm all out of slides, so we can circle back around to talking about the resolution. If you have any other questions, there's at least 4 members of the task force here tonight, and we'd be happy to continue this discussion.
And yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve. When you mentioned last fall and coming to us, and I know each time we've kind of said some of us need to hear something a little more concrete, right? And I really appreciate the effort that went into this presentation. That completely helps me understand it quite a bit better. So for the non-environmental scientists among us, I really appreciate that. That certainly helps us be able to sort of move some of this forward. And I know some of my fellow counselors have questions, so I'm going to let them go first. And I definitely have sort of a process question. I see Councillor Oberst first, and then Councillor McKeeble.
I find this all to be just absolutely fantastic and steps in the right direction. And Stephen, you're right. I think people figure, well, what's a little town like Monmouth going to do? But, you know, it takes grains of sand to build a beach, and we're a grain of sand. And if we can get a whole lot of other grains going, we'll have ourselves a climate plan. I have been an advocate for solar for a long time. When I last looked at it, it cost about I think the break-even point was 7 cents a kilowatt hour, which is just about where Monmouth Power and Light was. I think panels have come down significantly in price, and I would love if there is some way for us to begin a solar panel encouragement process out of MPL. And finally, I saw an interesting piece go by. We think of wind power and we think of giant windmills up the gorge. And this was a couple of examples of some folks who've developed wind power that are simply a vertical tower about 20 feet. One of them blows in the wind just a little bit, and as it sways back and forth, that motion is used to generate power. There's another one that the inventor is proposing for installation on streetlights next to highways, because all of the wakes that cars create as they drive by would make these things move and create more than enough power to power the light that they're mounted on and have some to spare. So if that's the sort of thing we need to consider in our code amendment process, that can you at current time mount a 20-foot pole on the end of your house to harvest wind power? I don't know. And we ought to make sure that we have room in our code for alternate energy production on site like that. Micro generation is, you know, again, enough people generate enough power, and who needs Bonneville, right?
Thanks. Councillor McKeel, did you have something for the group? Mute.
I'm right here.
Councillor Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you very much, you know, Mr. Howard and the other members of this group that have come here tonight. You know, this is really an issue that that every little step helps, and those little steps might not be fulfilling, but that's what it's going to take from both us as well as other, you know, entities throughout the world to be able to combat this problem. I noticed that one of your proposed actions was to create an intercity commission or board that would operate between Monmouth and Independence as an advisory board. I personally feel that this is something that we could do relatively quickly, that could have wide-ranging impacts in a lot of those little places that we're looking to find these efficiencies and build these wins. And maybe this is a better question for perhaps Marty or our city manager or Madam Mayor. How would we go about initiating this, intercity commission, and how would we find ways to make those recommendations impactful for Monmouth, as opposed to being a commission that's, just a feel-good commission?
Do you have a preference about who answers this?
Well, you can go ahead and I'll add if
I'm hoping that Mayor will also add to this. I think that having heard the discussion most recently by the Independent City Council about this question, I think that the idea of assessing the interest by both cities, maybe through a joint council meeting, would be one way to go forward. Procedurally, I've not seen a joint commission between the two cities, so I have that process question as well. But I think that I'm understanding if there's shared interest between these two cities would be a first step.
Yes, and I agree with that. I think they I think have sort of settled on really talking through this resolution that's being presented to us and kind of doing a work group on that, maybe potentially among their council. That's maybe a thought they were having. And we could determine certainly if there is a potential for a less than majority member of our council who wants to work on that, potentially connect with independents. I think this is the question. I think Stephen and Carol and Councillor Core and what you're hearing tonight is we and Mr. Cairns, we are interested in moving something forward. It really does meet with the value statements we are developing. It matches our planning process. So I think what you'll find is we are very supportive of moving something forward. And if we spend some time really talking about the process of how to take the suggested resolution you've brought, these maybe 8 points you've brought, and how we would workshop those to come up with something that we could visit with independents about, and then again, potentially a joint council meeting, which we can have those. We can have discussion at those. We don't make decisions at them, but that is certainly something that we could move forward. And potentially, when we've done that in the past, it's typically been if we have a 5th Monday in a month, because that would be, or Tuesday, because that would be a Tuesday night that neither city has its own council meeting. And just looking at that, there is a 5th Tuesday in June. So that would be the first opportunity really for a joint presentation and potentially discussion. And if we wanted to do some smaller work between now and then, Councilor Lopez, that might move us forward towards a better discussion on that June date if everyone is amenable to that. It's right before 4th of July weekend, so it might be a tough weekend to get folks to concentrate on this, but that would be one way we could move forward.
I have a follow-up to this specific item for Mr. Howard or anyone else with the group that would care to speak. I love the concept of the intercity committee. I'm concerned about the amount of time that it would take to set that up and have that be impactful. If that amount of time is warranted and it gives all of this more meaning and more weight, then absolutely. But if that amount of time is just going to be, you know, deliberative and hold us back from creating maybe, say, just a Monmouth advisory board, perhaps, or commission. We would be able theoretically to do that relatively quickly, in comparison, at least, and the path would be clear. So what specific benefits does the intercity board offer, and, you know, how do you weigh those against the benefit of getting something moving more quickly?
Yeah, and it's a tough question. I think, and other people on our task force should probably weigh in here, but my feeling is that having both cities working together is a matter of resources as much as anything else. I mean, there's certainly things that either city could do independently perfectly well. If you're talking about transit, if you're talking about, I don't know, there's probably other things. That's the big one that comes to mind, of course. There are certain things that only become possible at a certain scale. And I've certainly tried to target the slides that were presented tonight to work at a Monmouth scale or at an independent scale, for the most part. We do act as one community much of the time, though, so it certainly was a natural fit to consider doing something, but I think we are all concerned about drawing the timelines out farther than they need to be.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the concept of scale, and that gives us another scope to look at this through.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, not only the resources we have to put towards it internally, but the resources we can draw upon externally, right? It's much easier to attract outside investment, to attract grants, to attract government support when we are in partnership. So I think there's some additional advantages to that going down the line, even if it puts off the actual scope of the project an extra month or two. I had Councillor Salinas Oliveros. Did you have something? And then Councillor Carey, and then Councillor Oberst.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Howard, for being here, and everyone else who on the committee who's here. This is really great work, and it's important work. I always consider and think of you know, my family and their future, and so this is really exciting. And I guess I'm more leaning on the side of what Councillor Lopez was saying. I do think that working together, both cities, would be valuable. The time is what I'm concerned about as well. And I think maybe if both of our cities can come up with some great concepts and then come together during the times when we find certain aspects or sections that we can discuss together, and maybe that will save us some time, or we can start quicker. The other thing that comes to mind is once our cities really have something concrete in place, this is what our city is doing towards improving our climate, towards improving our future, then it's going to be a matter of, this is what you can do. And so, because the question that came up in my head as you were talking, it's like, well, what can I do? What can I do? So once we have the city concepts, thinking about how we can bring in and engage our entire community and making it more, I guess, real and more personable, like, okay, so you don't have money for solar panels, but you can also do this, or this is something else that you can do. So I think this could be a wonderful joint effort, and really showing our community that we care about the future of Monmouth and Independence. So, so thank you for that.
Councillor Carey, that was to you, and then to Councillor Oberst.
Yeah, I thank you, Stephen and committee. One of the things that and I would agree that if we could find a way to work together with Independence, it would make all kinds of sense. I mean, you know, you get to Winco and all of a sudden things change. I mean, come on, you know, it will work like two cities, one community, all that stuff. I think one of the things that we need to define is is, and in the resolution, it talked about the city of Monmouth, capital C, capital M, which suggests the governmental entity, which would be reflective of the city council. I think it would be easier for us to craft something that was city council centric initially, and then the degree to which we could expand that out in other ways, ordinance, code, all that would be good. I thought the 8 that you provided, city level, were interesting. I'm not sure when you talk about help retire existing fossil fuel use, and then talk about electricity. I don't know whether we have a lot of, we don't have much electric generation coming from fossil fuels. We're primarily hydro, which is, our Bonneville connection, which leads me down to the next one that we'd want to make sure, and I think this is why it'd be good to work with independents. We could localize this. A lot of the things in the proposed resolution were, sort of boilerplate from, larger entities. But I think we could do that locally if we worked with independents. So I think there'd be some real advantage to that. And thank you again.
Certainly.
Thanks, Councillor Oberst and Councillor McKeel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Stephen. I'd like to go back to something I did 10 years ago, which was served on ODOT's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Task Force. And they have set a target of trying to bring Oregon's greenhouse gas from transportation down. And the focus there, the modeling that came out from that group is all about electric vehicles. And we're starting to see that turn. And that's where Monmouth's drop in fossil fuel consumption will come from. And what can we do as a city to help people have backup power so that when Bonneville's line is dropped by a tree or a fire, they can still charge their car? What can we do to help people install the charging infrastructure in their garages or their driveways? We've got the switch to electric vehicles is not going to be seamless or quick or cheap, but I do believe it's coming. The cost of the vehicles continues to drop like a stone. As far as the joint body goes, the thing exists already. Stephen is here as its representative. The question becomes, do the cities formally recognize that body? Is it a different body? Do the cities have appointment power to that body? We have a model in some ways in Minnet of the two cities coming together to create a body that provides advice. Now, in that case, that body provides advice to Minnet, but the Minnet board. But we certainly should be able to create a body, and maybe we start with one for just Monmouth, but the long-term goal being, let's have a joint climate task force of some sort with the City of Independence that provides guidance and advice to both cities, both city councils. I'm not sure Pacific Power will listen to our input, but perhaps Monmouth Power and Light could listen to that group's input, et cetera. And let's see if we can't create that body in the long term. In the short term, Stephen, keep coming and giving us information. Let us know when you see things that this city might be able to adopt that would have an impact. Council, let's move forward with formally recognizing a body, and let's get together with our neighbors and talk about how to make that joint thing happen. A body that is not does not have necessarily authority, but certainly has the authority to give advice to the governing bodies of both cities.
The nice thing about that is this isn't Minnet, so we don't have to have an intergovernmental agreement. An advisory body, which we already have a fabulous one, can continue to advise us in a very informal capacity. It has members from both cities. We take their advice, we formulate, we move forward. So that's the nice thing. We don't have to have an official board or commission to say that this group are our recognized community experts, and we're going to continue to invite them in to review the work we're doing. So just, it can be as informal as that also. So Councilor McKeel, did you have something? And then Lane Shetterly.
So, Mr. Shetterly, do you need to speak first because we were talking about this joint group? Would that be more appropriate?
Well, if I may, I should know the answer to this, but Stephen, is the Community Climate Task Force, that's not at this point a governmental advisory committee. You're independent. You're self-starters.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. Yeah. So I'm trying to get my head around some of the procedural elements of this as well. Certainly, you can continue to hear from the Climate Task Force. They can meet as a private body under whatever kind of process they want to use. The only time they interface with you is at a council meeting. Yeah, okay. So I wanted to make sure I thought that was the case, but it was beginning to sound like maybe I've missed something at some point and that they had been officially sanctioned as a governmental entity. Okay, that was my own clarification. Thanks.
And so can I go now? I'm back to the, thank you. So I was wondering about this resolution that we had in the packet. Is this something that the city council has passed already? Or maybe a place to start is to get this resolution to something, I mean, it looks pretty good. I'm not being critical, but is this at a point where we could formally pass this to really start this ball rolling? Also, I think it might be good to look at some of the low-hanging fruit that exists within the resolution. So I know we're working on priorities this evening also, and in that is sustainability. And the city staff is going to kind of look at their own plans for how they could bring this about. And so is it something reasonable to ask the city staff to evaluate their practices to see if there's anything from this resolution, or even more creative, what they can come up with, to see what they are doing in order to meet, to change practices that would make us more climate friendly. And along with that, I think in so many ways, this slow start on trying to do something about climate change, I think so many of us have, instead of a look of solution, we have a look of panic. You know, every time we see something fall from Antarctica and falls into the ocean and the Arctic Circle shrinking and the fires, we have a sense of panic, but not necessarily a sense of action of what we can do. And when recycling started years and years ago, I remember recycling, it was like, oh wow, it's like when I was first married, so that's like 44 years ago. And we were recycling, and I would have people laugh at me that we were cleaning out cans and squashing things and putting them into recycling. And now nobody even thinks about it. They just throw it into the recycling bin, because there's been this purposeful education over the years. And now they don't even need it, right? Because everybody does it. But purposeful education about what you can do to recycle and why that's important to recycle. And I'm wondering, and I'm going to ask Mr. Howard and your group, with all the work you've done, can you help us come up with something every month that could go into the newsletter? Just kind of throwing this idea out there, maybe it won't work, but something that can go into the newsletter every month that says, I just making this up, like, you can change You can stop climate change. Here's a suggestion to do this month. To make it so that it becomes a normal process of our thinking, not just the panic of climate change, but the actions that we can take with that. I saw this happen when I was, years ago when I was in PTA, and I suggested that we start a recycling center in our local school, and I got laughed out of the PTA meeting. But the chair of the PTA said, no, go ahead, Carol. Let's do some fact finding, see what we should do. And I called the city and they said, we're going to start recycling curbside within a year. And so I talked to the chair and we decided not to do anything. Well, then the city started sending out information every month with the utility bill about recycling and why we should do it. And a year later, we had a PTA meeting and a member of the PTA who laughed at me the most actually called me a name about something about a stick and stuff like that, and said, whatever happened to that really good idea about recycling? So that was such a lesson for me of how you can shift the mindset by a constant messaging about what they can do. And it would be nice to see that low-hanging fruit, and I know you have it already in your proposal, Mr. Howard, so thank you for that, or the resolution. But it's so critical about the education piece and helping people see how they can be active instead of fearful. And I'm sorry, that was a really long thing that I talked very long.
So if we can unwind that going in reverse order, we have started compiling educational information on our website already. I'm sure it can stand to be expanded. We're trying not to overwhelm people with the first pass. Having worried about this for 20 years, I have driven myself crazy and my family crazy on a number of occasions, trying to do every little thing. And that's not what we want to do to people. So yes, we would definitely be interested in helping craft some sort of continuing messaging or education. I think that's probably a good activity for us. But I know you had a lot of procedural questions at the beginning of your statement, Councilor McKeel, and I definitely am not the person to answer that.
And I can take some of that. So your initial question about what do we do with this resolution? So just it is a proposed resolution here. If there was a motion tonight and a second and a majority of folks that adopt it or have staff drafted into our normal resolution form, that would be it, right? The other thing to do is to take a smaller work group and see, if there's any changes we want to incorporate, things we want to add or change for our purposes. I'll just remind you all that this work about sustainability is in our 21-22 goals. So again, I'm not trying to put all the brakes on, but we have a year in our goals. We've given ourselves a year to do some of this work. So it can certainly be done far before the end of June 30, 2022, but I'm not sure if our staff is ready to jump in and do a lot of work on this prior to June 30 of 2021. Marty will talk to you a little bit about kind of initial conversation she's had with department heads. And Mr. Oberst, go ahead, and then I'll just have her talk a little bit about that.
I'm going to defer to Marty because I think what I have to say wraps around what she has to say.
Okay, well, I guess we'll see, Councilor Oberst. I just had two comments about this work. I think that Councilor McKeel, to your question about what the department heads could do in terms of identifying low-hanging fruit, I see in Monmouth's, I'm going to just call it in Monmouth's Climate Action Plan, step one is the very kind of assessment that you're talking about. So we're looking where we look at our current practices and we say, what are the actions that we can take toward sustainability? So the idea of the broader climate action plan is there's a first step where we ask ourselves, what are we doing now? and at the same time identifying, and with the task force's, great work even tonight to be able to tell us, well, what are things that we could do? That would be a very early step in a sustainability action plan. The department heads and the staff here in Monmouth, as the mayor indicated, are in very early days discussion about what does this mean for us? What does it mean for our city practices? But also, what should we be looking to do? And I think that in that respect, the task force and the ideas that you've brought tonight are a great first step to help us understand where we could go. So I think what I'm saying is we're at a starting point, and that's where, and we would, need the help of the task force and also some structure around what a plan would look like to be able to start acting as is being requested.
Councilor Oberst, did that tie in?
Well, what I was going to say is at the end of the staff report, there's a list of 3 alternatives, which are all, to me, absolutely on the nose. Sit down and talk with independents of city council and see if we have interest in a joint body. Have an opportunity to take this resolution that's been presented tonight, look it over, have the time to give it a good read, send some suggestions to Marty, let Marty work on turning it into something that works for the city and works for staff. Run it back by Stephen, let Stephen take it to his people, bounce it around a little bit. While climate change is urgent, I think that another month or so is not going to break the bank on this one. Let's approach this resolution carefully. And then finally, I think it would be important to have that public outreach opportunity before we actually adopted this resolution. See if there are some things some folks would like to add to it or subtract from it. Have a little bit more council discussion around it. I'm not ready to vote tonight to adopt this resolution. I am ready to say, holy mackerel, this is a good resolution, Stephen. It's very impressive work. Let's see how it fits with what we're trying to do. And let's talk to independents about it.
And definitely have to thank other members of our working group to putting together this resolution. I'm going to take credit for it.
Give them a big thumbs up from me. It's great work.
Councilor Carey, and then I'm going to check in with Marty and see if she sort of has a rough direction from us about what else we can do here.
I have 2 points. There's a lot of lacking footnotes and definitions that are needed at some point in the proposed resolution. Those can all be worked out. One of the things that I didn't see in the resolution or in the city level, 8 city level actions was, and though it was mentioned, I didn't see anything that would that reflected the impact on what we might term as vulnerable communities. All this is while it may seem simple, it's expensive, and I just didn't see any of that short of appropriate financial and regulatory assistance from Polk County. It's probably not likely there. Wishful thinking and the region, state and federal authorities. So I think we're going to need to be cognizant of that, and I'm sure that we can get there. The other thing that I think we need to decide, and this would be just as our council, is how does this interface with our overarching sustainability piece? Would this be a way in which an example of our sustainability? Probably. That would be a pretty good way to go about it. Sustainability is much broader than just this, as we've talked about. So we just need to figure out how we're going to sort of meld the two when we get the two.
Thank you, Councilor Carey. That's great. And yeah, I think I like I would suggest that we take the staff recommendation and again, instead of alternatives, I agree with Councilor Oberst, we wrap those together and say that perhaps our next steps include further discussion with the independent city council, and certainly Marty and I can talk to the city manager and the mayor and determine for sure what their next steps were and how that fits, and provide specific feedback on this particular resolution. If each of us do that individually and submit that to Marty, she can gather that just as she's been gathering other group work from us. And then I like the idea of building a public outreach component. It certainly meets our other goals. And so working with this task force on, you know, how we do that, maybe getting some other input would be great. And again, sorry it stretches the process out, but I love the idea of starting together on this education. Just to let you all know, there's another little piece to this. Marty and I have started the process of considering applying to have a rare intern come to the community. And one of the things that these interns do a lot of work in is in the area of sustainability. They have some particular expertise and connections. Those connections are actually to professors and institutes at the University of Oregon. So this would be the kind of thing that we could task to a rare intern and really get some graduate level work out of somebody like that who would help us really continue this, flesh it out, and make this a project. Again, hate to draw this out, but if we apply and are successful, we would have that person here in September. So that work would not, you know, to have extra staffing for it would be down the road a little bit. Other than that, some of this we can easily do with the lovely and talented staff we have sitting right next to me. I commit her to do a little bit of this to kind of keep it moving forward. But if you would give us some grace to do some of that back end work and think through, but I think really having particularly this intern work on this public outreach piece help us develop a robust process for that. I think that would be a fantastic project that would benefit both cities and the work we're trying to build. So Councilor Oberst, Councilor Lopez, make it quick.
Do rare interns come at a cost to the city, or are they, and if so, what are we looking at? But as a general statement, yes.
It costs the city's contribution is $25,000. So, but if we put that together with some other types of work, it could be eligible under the new CARES Act money that we're getting, for example. So anyway.
And that's for a full year intern, is that correct?
Full year, full-time intern that comes to us trained, oriented, and ready to work. Yeah.
The last one we had trapped peacocks.
Well, we're thinking of higher level work than that. Councilor Lopez, did you have something to wrap us up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And this is perhaps pertinent to our next steps here. It's my understanding that this resolution was delivered or has been delivered to both the Independence and Monmouth councils. And before we get our fingers into this too much, I would suggest that as a first positive step toward jointly moving forward to with this as a community with Independence would be to begin speaking with Independence about a joint council session to hopefully come up with a version we can both agree on and pass together.
Great, thank you for that comment. I believe Ms. Wine has a meeting with Mr. Pessimer tomorrow, and I'm guessing it may be on the agenda, so. And I will be meeting with Mayor McArdle next Monday, and I'm pretty sure it'll come up again there, so. Great, thank you all for that discussion. Thank you again, Stephen and Shannon and Carol and, well, Michael, Kathy, really appreciate bearing with us, educating us, supporting us as we try to do this new work. So thank you.
You're welcome. And we're very grateful for your enthusiasm, and if we can continue talking in the meantime while nothing's on paper yet, we would be more than happy to do so.
Thanks. All right, with that, I'm gonna ask indulgence for a few-minute break before we move into the discussion about not only our City Hall project communications update and our discussion of those council values wrapped around this. So I have 8:24.
So Cease, was it your direction that we should provide suggestions on that draft resolution to Marty? Or are we just gonna sort of let that perk for a little while?
Sorry, we're playing with the microphones. Yeah,
Oh.
I think if you do have ideas, go ahead and forward them to them. I think the idea that we may try to do this more in concert with Independence was floated, but definitely thoughts you have now, it's not going to hurt to gather those. So yes, she'll take those.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all for returning. And so we can continue with our business agenda. We have a very brief item and then a more extensive item. So we will, I'll turn it over to Marty Wine.
Thank you. Madam Mayor and Council, the next item on your agenda is truly just designed to give you an update about our communication efforts related to our project to replace the City Hall. On the city side of communicating, we've now filed the measure and have a measure number. And so in light of that, what we're trying to do is ensure that at this point, all of the information that we're putting out is neutral and factual. But also in that spirit, we are trying to, in these next few months, provide as much information as possible about the need and the nature of the replacement project as possible. And we have updated our website and have a bunch of other steps that we're going to be taking to communicate. So truly, this was meant as a staff report to you to inform you about what our efforts are that are underway for the city to be providing information. And a lot of it resides now on our website. And between now and election day, we are working on putting together some communication materials so that we will be mailing and sending and providing that information to our community before May 18th. So I won't go into depth about what's in the staff report unless you all read it and have questions, but I mostly wanted you to know what's out there at this point. And I would also take your suggestions in your travels and talking with the community about what you're hearing is of interest. And I'll leave my report there and take any questions or suggestions you have.
Councilor Oberst.
It's my understanding that the executive committee of the Political Action Committee met on my patio on Sunday. And if anybody has any questions, please contact me offline. I'd be glad to fill you in on where we are.
Great. Thank you very much. So that moves us to a discussion about our value statements. We had a great opportunity to really kind of work through some of that and really appreciate the Marty mashup of bringing, just sort of melding the written ideas that she had. We have this slated for a 45-minute discussion. We are about 22 minutes away from a 9 o'clock deadline. So we'll carry the conversation into 9 o'clock and see the appetite for continuing it a bit beyond that. So Marty.
Actually, Madam Mayor, you did a great job of queuing up what my effort in the past week and since the council's last discussion was, as you said, to mash it up. So for those of you who did work ahead of time to be thinking about these statements of the council values, thank you for the work that you did. And for those who didn't, the whole effort here was to have a discussion draft before you so that you could talk about the concepts related to values for each of these 3 areas that you've identified: diversity, equity, and inclusion, communication and engagement, and sustainability. And my hope was just to have a discussion draft here for you to start your discussion so that you can settle on as a council those statements of values that you would like to adopt, I guess I would say. So I don't have anything to add beyond just I did some work to edit everything into one place, into a statement in these 3 concepts, and I have no pride of authorship at all. It truly was designed for you to as a launching point for your discussion.
So discuss. Who's got thoughts? Again, I really appreciate the sort of three areas, what we value, what does this mean, and what we will do. I will tell you that some of my friends here on the screen, they have a Myers-Briggs behavior style that they will probably say needs to be more specific, some actions, not more talk about what the value is, but what are some of the action steps. So I'm looking at Mr. Carey and saying that might be one of the comments he's going to ask us. What are some, really more, what do we do in these things? But other than that, I think overall the format is fabulous, and not sure if we have an appetite for wordsmithing here tonight, or if we really want to talk more generally. If folks have ideas about that, please share. I'm going to Councillor Oberst and then McKeel and Carey.
I was just going to start out with a sustainability statement as the first one. First of all, I think that it's a really well phrased piece in a lot of ways. There's a little bit of wordsmithing that might need to go into this one, not a lot. And when I get to the what we will do section, I noticed in what this means that we call out other forms of things that we want to be sustainable, financial, built, social capital, et cetera. But when we get down to what we do, we seem to be mostly talking about in the environmental. And I'd like to consider extending what this means into what we will do, and kind of covering those bases. Overall, this really speaks to me, the sustainability statement, and I think Marty, you've done a good job of saying what that means to me as a city council member, and trying to lead a city. This is just nails it. It's really well done. You pulled together some nice aspects.
Well, actually, respectfully, Councillor Oberst, I thought what happened in the what this means was provided the details of the areas that this the statement addresses, and then what happened in what we will do, it compacted them into very nicely the environment, the economy, and the community. So I actually, other than possibly a comma here or here or there, and I wouldn't even really speak to that because I think it actually stands well on its own. I like the sustainability statement as is. Nice job, Madam City Manager.
I'll take that criticism, Carol.
Well, I guess I kind of see what you mean, right? So in what we do, if we are interested in keeping the community capital, right? So this is a social science theory about 7 kinds of community capital. And if we are going to keep those, all 7 of them, or any part of the 7 of them, then to kind of refocus, what do we do under each of them, or how do we address others than the economy and environment. But if we take them out of the above and leave them in the bottom, that's fine as well.
And you're very gracious, Councillor Oberst.
I'm not sure I was calling for taking them out of the above, but rather extending them down to the below. Calling out environment, economy, or community is 3 words out of that whole paragraph, and I just wanted to make sure that we drew attention to those other factors that weren't just environmental, maybe just a little bit more blatantly. That's all. I can live with it as it stands, no problem.
I'd be fine if you just took those, what would you say, Madam Mayor, 6, 7 words and just pulled them back down and repeated. I thought it was literally nicely done, but it'd be fine if it was more clear. So I'm retracting what I said, so never mind.
Well, I see what you mean, John, and that then we are very specific in what we will do, that we talk about renewable energy, recycling models, habitat ecosystems, and carbon footprint. Those are very much on what is called the natural capital, and so very detailed about what we'll do about preserving our natural capital. And
That's it. You nailed it. That's exactly it.
really nothing about how we'll preserve financial capital or our infrastructure or social capital, those kind of things. So. And so the what we will do statements probably could take a lot more work. Councillor Belts, help us.
Well, I don't know how this falls in the grand scheme of all of this, but I remember there was a conversation last time about, are we talking about council or are we talking about city? And so clearly this is focused on council, but I'm a little concerned then about the very last sentence. Recruiting, hiring, and retaining a diverse workforce sustains our ability to equitably serve our community. We don't make any hiring decisions other than the city manager. So I'm not sure if that's a clear statement. I understand the purpose of saying that, but we may want to make sure it's clear we're not talking about us hiring people for the city. So I don't know how to word that differently. Maybe I'm not understanding it.
Yeah, or does that fit under sustainability? I mean, I think that's another thing. If you look at the overlaps, right? We've got a lot of good overlap, and it's important to call out equity and inclusion and diversity in everything, but that statement is maybe not. Obviously, we will best sustain our equity, diversity and inclusion in the hiring practices, but is that part of the sustainability statement or part of the equity? I think that's going to be hard because we're saying everything we do will have these three lenses or telescopes or magnifying glasses. So how much do we repeat ourselves in each one, and how much do we make these more distinct, I guess? Councillor Salinas Oliveros and then Councillor McKeel.
Yes, I actually like the connection, and I think that last sentence goes with the cultural, political, human, and financial aspect. And as far as, you know, people understanding whether or not we are the hiring bodies, I don't think that's, I guess, as critical as really stating that we're going to encompass the whole meaning of sustainability, including the cultural, political, the human, the financial built. And this is how we are stating it in the sustainability statement, because it does make a difference in how we sustain those who work with us. I mean, I think it's evident in how long people stay with the city. That speaks very well to how we treat and how we sustain our employees, and how that generates all this continued good work and knowledge that we need for the city. And so I think that statement needs to be in there, just because it does talk about our human capital. It talks about, you know, our cultural capital, and our people power make the difference for everything else that we want to sustain. And if we can't sustain our people capital, if we can't sustain our employees, our you know, the people we work with, then it's going to be really difficult to sustain anything else. So somewhere in this statement, that has to be in there. That's my 2 cents.
And Carol?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think if I could say anything that's beyond what Councillor Salinas Olivero has already said, but I think those last 2 sentences in the what we will do are very clearly tied to the economy, because if you are not recruiting, hiring, and retaining a diverse workforce, you are not really sustaining your local economy. What you're doing is kind of a limping fashion of your economy if you're not bringing everybody in. And I think also there's already economic models looking at the renewable energies, using recycling models, protecting the habitat. There's already economic models that show how much a lack of climate friendly, as our climate goes more downhill, it's costing us more money. So tonight, Mr. Howard was talking about how we needed to have warming stations. Well, if we're doing warming stations, we're not making parks. So it is costing us. And I think to have those statements sorry, I'm pointing to my other screen, having those statements in this for sustainability actually does immediately address the economy.
Oh, yeah, don't disagree that there are overlaps there. I'm just saying, what level of detail do you put in the what do we do, right? Do we put a less granular level of awareness of the economy and looking at our climate resolution? We can put that as a to-do, right? Rather than listing out all the various things that affect natural capital, which then do affect economic capital and social capital and cultural capital. So, okay. And John, did you have something? And then Roxanne?
Yeah, I like the inclusion of the final sentence. I don't like the way it's written. To Roxanne's point, I think we could say something to the effect that create an environment where, or create policies where recruiting, hiring, and retaining a diverse workforce sustains our ability to equitably serve our community. So something to that's more of an action that we would be taking. The sentence to me that sort of just hangs out there and I don't see that it doesn't seem to fit with the others is the one right prior to that. That we acknowledge that sustainability includes changing our system that have denied opportunities to those historically underrepresented. That's probably a fact. Well, I'm sure it's a fact. I don't know that that's an action statement. If we're going to create an environment, we're going to encourage creativity and beyond, and seeking renewable, and then we have this sort of other one that didn't seem to fit in there. So I don't know, maybe somebody else sees a nexus of that with others. I don't.
And you were nodding vigorously, so
yeah. Let me add one more thing. I do think based on our conversation earlier, somewhere along the line in what we do, we need to reference that we will work towards a climate crisis resolution of some sort. That's preferred, but I think we've become a little more specific.
Okay. So Roxanne, anything to add before we go back to Carol?
No, just that's exactly what I was trying to get to is I believe the statement should be there. It's just that we don't do the hiring. It's just that. So thank you, John. You did perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So actually, thank you, Councilor Carey, because good eyes are editing, whatever. That statement, we acknowledge that sustainability includes changing our systems. That sentence actually, I think might be better because you're right. It's not what we will do, but yes. And I saw Cease go like this. Yeah, put it up into the second section maybe because it fits better there. So nicely done. Yeah.
And Rebecca.
I was just going to say, with all those edits that we've spoken about, I think we're, in my opinion, pretty close on this one.
So we can maybe get another draft out of it that Marty can send back out to us. And Councilor Oberst.
So we moved that sentence up, and the last sentence in what this means is wrapped around the same concept at some level, with social equity being the last item on the list. So perhaps those two sentences, next to last and what we will do, gets moved up into what this means and gets mashed together with sustainability includes, and see if you can come up with a single sentence there. Just a suggestion. I'm not going to try to do it. And to Roxanne's point that we don't do the hiring, I would say that this at some level is marching orders for the city manager too. And I think she is wise enough to understand that when council says you need to march this way, that she should probably pay attention to that, or give us a really good reason why she disagrees. So, you know, I like John's edit. I think it works, but I wasn't concerned that John's edit works very well.
Do you have what you need?
I have what I need. Thank
She
you,
has
council.
what she
This is
needs.
helpful guidance.
We shall move to communication and engagement.
I have one question in
Yes.
Councilor Ober's comment. We're not losing that sentence, right, about, okay, all right, great, thank you. It sounded like we were mashing it together, but I think it's a good sentence. Okay.
All right, communication and engagement. Overall thoughts, picky thoughts? What you got?
Rereading it.
I think I like this one as well, although then I said, oh, you're right, yeah. But there was just one sentence, and not to wordsmith, but I think there's a missing word or something. 1, 2, 3. I think the fourth sentence in the what this means section. And I've read it a couple times, but that doesn't mean my eyes blurred and I just didn't. But it looks like there might be something missing in there.
Yeah. Build many connections and partnerships in the city with partners and regionally.
Yes.
Yeah, that
I think,
sucks.
well, I think that the S should come off the word engagements for
Right.
start. So the idea is that the act of engaging serves to build partnerships. So probably possible to
In the
simplify that.
city and regionally, yeah.
And maybe you just don't need the with partners and just in
Right.
partnership in the
Yep.
city and regionally. I think maybe that's it. It's just with partners can be taken out. Yeah.
Thank you. Everybody's got comments.
Oh,
What? Rebecca? Yeah.
yes, I was going to say, I was just going to suggest where it was connections and partnerships in the city and with partners, and maybe partnerships in and out of the city and regionally, and take out with partners altogether. And then there was the other couple one that had community engagement creates the most effective public policy, thoughtful, encouraging. That engagement is critical to serving our community, I thought. And then the last sentence, I thought maybe just switching the last two sentences around, one before the other, just because when you try to read thoughtfully encouraging the engagement right after community engagement, I don't know, maybe that's too picky, but I was trying to read it and making it flow. And when I read it out loud, it just didn't flow for me. And maybe that was just the way I was talking. I don't know. It's not a huge edit. It's not a big deal. That's just my 2 cents. But I think overall, I think it looks very nice.
I think another way to do that, Rebecca, that's a good point. And again, the wording is the grammar's not that great, but another way to do that too is the Monmouth residents and our partners should know how decisions that are arrived at and their intended effect, which also is bad grammar, maybe we can make that an action step, right? You know, that we will ensure that Monmouth residents understand how our decisions are arrived at, dangling participle, and so maybe we can reword that part, move it down. Okay, I'll work on that. John C. and Chris Lopez.
I made a couple notes on this like over the weekend and haven't been back to it, so I'm sort of catching up in my mind. A sentence that I would suggest that is modified somewhat would be in the what we will do. It's the fourth one up. If everyone who wants and needs to be involved with the city knows how to access what they need. Like that. I don't like that sound.
Pretty broad.
But we could say to ensure that those who want or need to be involved with the city knows or understands how to access, what they need. Make it an accurate statement rather than a declarative one.
Good. Chris and then John Oberst.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'll start. I was pretty quiet in the last portion of the discussion. I'll start by saying that I'm just blanket really happy with these. But I do feel that in the communication engagement, as well as, I know we're not there yet, but I'll say it now so I don't have to say it again, as well as the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion statement, what we value, I feel that those portions are too long in both of these statements. The length of the what we value in the sustainability statement, it's 2 lines plus 3 words, and that's just right to me. The goal therein being that these are things that if we're going to live them, if we're going to weave them into everything we do, they have to be things that we can easily memorize, easily roll off our tongues. And if you're speaking to someone down in the ice cream parlor in the park this summer after we're all vaccinated and enjoying the outdoors when it's sunny and beautiful and warm, someone says, "Well, what's Monmouth doing this year?" I want to be able to, off the top of my head, say exactly these 3 things, and they need to be a little shorter to be able to do that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. John O.
So I wasn't going to go here, but thanks, Chris. I would simply drop the first sentence on that, what we value, and say, we believe that community engagement is the heart of successful city governance. We value what every individual brings to help move our city forward. And the last sentence somehow, and I had it and now I've lost it, to help our city move forward, we want to build strong partnerships, and I just made a run-on sentence, and share Monmouth's story. Or just end it at, we want to build strong partnerships. And see if we can shorten that up by dropping a sentence or 2. And this goes way back in the discussion. Marty, when you say community engagements build many connections, and this is in the second section, many connections and partnerships in the city with partners, were you thinking outside partners when you put that word partners in there? Is that intended to stand for outside partners?
That was my sentence.
I think it was, I'm frankly not sure at this point, but I think that
was my bad.
I think the idea was to call out partners inside and outside the city.
Yeah, so I mean, my words on that would be to simply say, build connections and partnerships within the city with outside partners and regionally. And that would cover pretty much everybody. Unless we want to go ahead and say statewide and anybody else who will talk to us,
So is there heartburn around the Monmouth City Council believes that community engagement is the heart of successful city governance? We value what every individual brings to help move our city forward. and one other little bit of a sentence there. Those would be our 2 sentences in something like that. Takes out empowerment. Does that give anybody heartburn?
The only thing I see in that is that very last sentence is softer than the others. It's we want to build. Why not just say we build strong partnerships? Because we believe, we value, we build strong partnerships and share them on this story, period.
Well, I wonder if you just want to say we share Monmouth's story proactively, because the next section talks about building strong partnerships. So, I'm sorry, Councilor Selena Salaveros, I jumped in there and you had your hand raised. I'm sorry.
No, I just had a quick thought, and let's see if I can remember it on the last one, where it says so we value what every individual brings to help our city move forward. We build, as Roxanne was saying, and we build strong partnerships, empower our community, and share Monmouth's story, or something, correct? Or something like, in that sense, and then you get empowerment in there, but you don't get the whole entire sentence, because I do also agree that we need to shorten it. So I don't know. That's my feedback.
Okay, John. Oh.
My version is sort of like that, in that I say we value strong partnerships and what every individual brings to help our city move forward, and mashing those last 2 together. I didn't get empowerment in, Rebecca. I'm sorry.
I like empowerment in there, though. I think I do think it's good to have that in there.
I think we can work with that. John Kerry, one other thought on this? Any?
Yeah, just a quick one. I don't really have anything specifically, and it's not a complaint. One of the things that we talked about yesterday, or the last time we discussed this, was providing people with a reason to be involved. And, we have town halls and nobody shows up. I mean, we are doing all of these things and we're not getting as many people as we want. So something to reward, something to recruit, something to incentivize. I don't know what the verb is, but some way to make people want to be there. I don't know. I don't have it right now, and I'm not going to get it, but maybe somebody else does, or maybe it's in the next iteration.
No, you're trying to inspire people.
Well, yeah, or we give them the reason, what's in it for them. We tell them what's in it for them, right? And that's one of our action things. And there's a nice way to say that. We'll figure it out, Rebecca.
Well, not sure if this makes sense, but we are responsible to create equitable platforms of communications. Let's see, that promote communication and provide reason that promote full participation, or something like that, so that everyone in our city can thrive. So I don't know if reason is the word or inspiration is the word, but I hear what Councilor Kerry is saying, and we need to continue to work on that message. But I think we can do it very simply. I don't think it's going to take a whole nother sentence.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good way to get it in there. And we are responsible to create is another crappy sentence I think I wrote. So
I don't think you wrote that.
John?
Mashing.
So I've been saying for 15, 20 years that the hardest thing going is getting people out of their living room after dinner. And I have yet to figure out what the enticement is. I said cookies, this is Councilor Kerry, because that sometimes helps, offering people come down for dessert. I'm a firm believer in food as a lubricant for conversation too. So it's hard. I mean, people work hard and they come home and they don't really want to leave their house to come down to City Hall in the evening. And how to make ourselves such a compelling thing that they want to,
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, bud. It's after 9 o'clock and So we're
Okay.
not trying to solve the
Right.
problems here. We're trying to word the statements. Then we'll solve
Okay,
problems.
yeah, it's tough, that's all.
Thank you, my friend. Okay, I think we're ready. We got a second draft will come out of that. So we're ready for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And let's start with the top do we need to make that more impactful? And I hope Mr. Lopez has an idea, and he does.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. My idea was really just bumping around a sentence and removing something. I feel free to hate it, love it, whatever. But I think we can lose the first sentence as much as I like the portions about being historically underrepresented. I think we start by saying we are committed to courageously practicing equity to guide all of our work. That's a powerful statement. And then say we are better when we acknowledge and include all viewpoints and experiences, and we actively recognize and strive to overcome the systemic and historical barriers that some of our community members have faced. That's something I can remember, and I think you guys did a great job at crafting it. I think that just condensing it there, I'm happy with.
Hey, that gets major thumbs up unless John had a slight comment on that one. Carrie?
I personally don't like the word courageously. You know, it sounds like it's a Herculean deal, and that we're all heroes because we're doing it. I'd prefer something like enthusiastically, or something else. When I read the courageously, I thought, wow, I don't feel a need to be called courageous for practicing equity as a guide to all of our work. Small thing.
I want to hear Rebecca's thought on this. You know, that was a specific word I believe she selected. So
Yes, and that's a specific word I selected out of our core values session, and that's one of our core values. And so, and yes, Councilor Carey, it may not be like, oh, we're so brave to do diversity, equity, inclusion, but when you think about it, we kind of are, just because it's going to take effort, and it is, and there are going to be times where we're going to be faced with decisions that we need to find that courage to make those decisions. And so, and maybe courageously isn't the word, but I think we need a strong word in there, like courageously, just because it takes work to practice. It takes work to move towards diversity, equity, and inclusion.
John O.
And I appreciate the word, and when you first brought it up, Rebecca, the session with you, Chris, and I working through it, it rang. But I also wonder about just if committed doesn't say the same thing. We are committed to practicing equity. You can just say we're going to practice equity, but if we say we are committing ourselves to this, does that do it? I don't know. I'm trying to kind of wrap around what John said on this too. It didn't hit me quite right when I read it either, and I wasn't sure why.
And I could live with that if we make it a strong statement. We are committed to practicing equity and guide all of our work. As long as it's a strong statement, I can live with that.
Chris?
Yeah, I like courageously. I can live without it, but I like courageously, and I'll tell you what it means to me. It means to me that there are going to be times, and I don't know what those are, but there are going to be times that we're faced with difficult decisions, difficult monetarily, difficult within the public sphere, difficult within our own dynamic. And, you know, it is going to take real courage to face those, to do what we're saying we're going to do in this statement. So by saying that we're courageously doing it, this sentence isn't courageous, but by saying this sentence, we're committing to that courage, ourselves to that courage in the future. And that's why I like it.
Jono,
So what if we drop courageously down to the now second sentence, the last sentence, and we're better when we acknowledge and include all viewpoints and experiences, and we courageously strive to overcome the systemic and historic barriers some of our community members have faced, and drop it into the second sentence and say, instead of actively recognize and strive, say courageously strive to. You can't be courageous without being actively having active recognition, I think. Don't know, just trying to pull all this around together.
Yeah, the first sentence is saying what we're committed to, and the second sentence is kind of going into what we're better when. I still like it up top, but I'm happy scrapping it. I'm happy moving it to the bottom. But if I were to move on this myself, I'd leave it in up top. I recognize that I'm part of the group, and I'm more than happy to you know, to move on without it.
done. See?
I was just going to say that you know, courageous decisions center on land use, budget decisions. It doesn't take any courage for me to make a commitment to equity at all. I mean, that's a value. I mean, I don't even think second about that personally. I don't reckon most of you do either, if you really thought about that. I mean, the tough ones are the land use things and the budget stuff. This is simple because that's what we believe in. I mean, to me, but again, I'm not going to die on my shield on this one.
I love that, John. But having had face-to-face conversations with people in our community who don't think by emphasizing equity, diversity, inclusion, we're actually over-representing some people, and having to suck up my courage to be able to tell them that they were full of, I think you'll find there may be decisions it will take courage to defend because of some other people's values, not ours.
Yes, I agree. I see it every Sunday on the corner of 99 in Main. It hasn't slowed down. And if you could see the anger, the people hanging out of their windows, stopping in the middle of the intersection just to tell us to go fuck this, that, whatever, and hanging out, threatening us, it's ugly. It is ugly. But yet, we find the courage to keep going. And not knowing what we're going to get that day, not knowing, you know, what's going to happen that day, we show up. So we are going to have difficult conversations, and I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Carey. And, you know, I feel honored to be serving on this council with you, because I wish that it was the same for everybody, what you're saying, but it just isn't right now.
So we'll move on. It's almost 20 after, so I think hopefully we can do a little bit of editing in these next couple in the next 10 minutes, determining, I guess. I'm looking at sort of the next section, and Marty was generously trying to use all of the words we used, and obviously some of them are repetitive. Are there some that stand out to folks as being really important to include, or some that seem to be redundant? And I'll go with Rebecca and then John O.
Yeah, for me, I think it's down, let's see, if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I do feel it's really important to have, we acknowledge our systems and culture that have created barriers and excluded Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, LGBTQ2IA+, and then I added and other marginalized communities, because there are other marginalized communities that are not included here, and to take out the next sentence, the people by race, ethnicity, gender, sex, sexual orientation, only because it's mentioned up here and it kind of repeats. Maybe adding sexual orientation up here. But other than that, I think we say what's in this sentence ahead of time. And then the last piece of this, we wish to create a community with honesty and fairness where we can engage all members and create a community where everyone belongs, and just take out of the Monmouth community together. But that's my 2 cents. I just think it's really important to have and to be intentional, especially in the statement, or community members are not going to believe what you're saying in the statement otherwise.
Thanks. And I think what Marty was maybe trying to do there is say the race, ethnicity, origin, ability could go one or the other place. I think that was either her option. It's that where it is to start with, or it's in the list of other things. So if there's a sense of that, John O. and then Chris.
So I've said I don't like lists, but I like the first list because, and I think in part it's the list I grew up with. I can't tell you how many times I heard age, gender, age, race, ethnicity, nationality, whatever. And the nice thing about the list in that form is that just about everybody can find themselves on that list somewhere. When you start to have a more specific list that calls out specific subgroups, that's where it gets harder. I love this first list. I'm fine with the, Rebecca's list down lower to keep that in there as well. I was concerned about having it be the lead off to everything, and I do want to include it. So it starts to pull together. And I think meet, my concerns and Rebecca's concerns at the same time by heading down this road. And I got to say again, whoever did the writing here between the two of you, you struck a nice balance of all the things we've talked about.
Chris?
Yeah, Councilor Overs beat me to it. I'm just gonna reaffirm what he said. That wonderfully written, and I am glad that age is included in there, and that we were able to strike a balance between the two. I was going to suggest that the first portion that Rebecca had listed there, instead of that second or portion, was the one that we go with, and I really. I'm impressed by the tightrope that y'all walked for us. Thank you.
John?
I read this and I didn't love it, and so I went looking for something else, and I went to our inclusivity statement that we had created in 2017, I think, at the height of the immigration faux-pas. And while it's written a little bit in that direction, there's a whole lot of good stuff in that. And so my intent was to try to go in, pull some of those things out, provide an alternate to this other one, the one we're talking about, and have another alternative. I think there's some really good stuff in that. Lane wrote that. He pulled it, plagiarized it from somewhere, and it was good because we don't really talk about a whole lot citizenship, and the difference between citizens and residents. And it might be referenced once, but there's a whole variety of things. And so anyway, and it was on the website at one point and then pulled off for some reason. It's hard to find. But I would encourage you to read that just for ideas on how we might phrase some things. And Phyllis, it was on the web page at one point. It's no longer there, but I could find it, search it deep, and did find it. But anyway, it's good reading.
I've got a
Councilor
record,
Carey.
it was entirely original composition.
Counselor Carey, you'll find this either funny or sad, but Phyllis, actually, the inclusivity resolution has been a feature on the front page of our website until about 2 days ago when we shifted it so that the City Hall project would have front billing. But you can still find the inclusivity resolution on the City Council page. So there's a link there. And I know you have to dig for it, and I'm sorry for that. We'll write that balance soon.
John O.
Just one other word. Partway through the last section, we say, I've lost it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Identify systemic barriers and develop cultural competency. Cultural competency is a mighty high bar. To really become competent in another culture is, almost a lifetime endeavor. And we're talking about multiple cultures. So I'm wondering about cultural awareness. Simply making ourselves aware of alternate cultures and not trying to claim we're going to become competent in them. Because that's, I'm concerned that we're putting a bar up for staff that is really maybe more than can be realistic.
Carol and then Chris.
Actually, cultural competency has a specific meaning, and it's okay, I think, to use the word as it's written. It has meaning, and nobody expects you to be able to understand all cultures from that statement, but it is meaning a sensitivity that you can have with all cultures. So it actually is it's a definition kind of word. So I think we need to leave it in there.
Okay, I read it as I saw it, not knowing that it has a separate definition, and I think most people will read it as written rather than as defined. That's all.
I think this is part of an education process.
Chris?
Yeah, I wanted to draw back to something that Councilor Carey said about the inclusivity resolution, and I believe that most of you have read that. I know for a fact that I've personally handed it to a few of you, and so Councilor Carey, fear not that individuals have read it here. And I've actually been out and I've handed it to a handful of people out in town. I think that was a good bit of writing, but I'm really excited to build on it instead of rehash it. And I think that that this piece here really addresses a lot of things that are timely now that we need to address.
I think in interest again of just a couple more minutes, I know that in the what we will do section, there might be a couple of duplications or ways to, for example, it says to truly serve, we will learn and be receptive to all individuals' identities of race, ethnicity, gender. That's a repeat, obviously, of our statement above. So perhaps we can edit that down a little bit. I think there's wishing to create a community with honesty and fairness. And then down below, we seek honesty and fairness with engaging our communities. So that's a little bit duplicative. So I think unless anyone has anything other real specific, I think now we can probably move to a second draft on this one. Or if you have really good thoughts about wording and condensing or expanding, maybe forward those on to Marty from here. Let John make a last comment and Carol make a last comment.
My comment's off topic. It's something just before closing.
Thank you. Carol?
And we will set the example by instilling and training. Is there something missing after instilling or instill? Yeah, so it looks like there's but you don't want equity there, but there's maybe a word, but.
Yeah, that's good. We'll take a look at that. There's definitely some weird word mashup going there.
Really, Madam Mayor, Madam City Manager, I am so happy with the work that you did. And you have to sit and have your writing just torn up and wrenched and reworked, and thank you for your courageousness for that. So,
Thank you,
and nicely done, really nicely done.
Great. No,
We've
thanks
got
all of
enough
you.
for the next draft. Thank you.
Lovely. John, you had a last comment. I also want to, we've got the College Manor Apartments. We're doing the mural that is on the side of that building. Thursday, we're going to be videotaping and getting ready to do the big reveal there. So I just wanted to remind folks of that. That's a really exciting new piece of public art that was partly supported by our Arts and Culture Commission. And I wanted to be sure to mention that. So Councilor
I'm sorry,
Oberst.
Madam Mayor, what
First
time?
of all, what's the address on that apartment house?
Yeah, when, where?
Well, I thought you all got invitations.
I
No.
don't think so.
Let me see. The
address is 265 College Street.
Yeah, College Manor Apartment, 265 College Street. And trying to see, I have this huge script thing about all the different things happening.
Thursday
at noon,
I think it's
we have a photo and video moment of the VIP group. Maybe. I don't know. I'll
starts at
check
11.
on this. I'm not sure.
It starts at 11.
yeah, the guest
Starts at 11. Guests start at 11.
Yeah.
11 a.m. Guests start arriving at 265 College Street for the College Manor Apartments mural unveiling. Thank you. Thanks, Phyllis. All right, and
So, my comment is primarily for my fellow first go counselors, but you probably got an email from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission about e-filing your stuff. Don't forget, it's important. It's one of those ones that sometimes drops down your box. I did mine. It's relatively quick and easy for those of us without too many entanglements in life, I think. So be sure to get that done. And unless somebody else has something, Madam Mayor, I would love to make a motion.
I have one more thing. Hold on. I have my internet's going out. Am I in? Okay, you're all moving. Okay. Actually, Pride Month is coming up in June, and I was wondering if we could request that the city, or I don't know how to do this. Can we put up a banner for Pride Month, or I know the street lights have the two metal rods. You could put the Pride flag on the street lights. It'd be great going up and down Main Street with the Pride flag on both sides. So I don't know how to do that other than to say, can we put up a flag or a banner?
yeah, that's a great question. We do change those out. The flagpole banners partly is a project of the Monmouth Downtown Association. There are some flags, some banners that exist in city inventory. Sort of researching where you would find banners and acquire banners and how much they would cost, and then figuring out how that would be paid for, if that's a project that the Downtown Association is interested in helping fund, or if we need to try to find something in city funds. And I think Marty can work with them to take a look at that, and Suzanne, and see what the cost would be. That and who will bear that would be an issue. So thanks though for that.
Will we have information about that at, I'm not putting pressure on it, but it's like June's gonna come really fast. Will we be
So-
able to have information that,
Councilor McKeel, I am researching this and I am not sure when I get information back, I will report to the council and we'll try to do that with enough lead time to be able to make it happen. But I don't,
Okay.
I'm asking the questions now about who owns them, how to obtain them and what the cost is, as the mayor said. As soon as I have that information, I'll bring it back to council and report back.
because if we,
Well, there's active club on the university campus that might have something as well.
Thank you.
and I'm thinking we might be able to, oh, so sorry, my brain stops working at 9 o'clock every time. If we don't have the money, there may be people willing to pitch in to make sure we can have the money to do that. So that's why I was like, if we find out sooner, I can find out who wants to pitch in. So no pressure. Marty, I was just trying to like figure out if we need to ask people to help pitch in, that's all. So thank you.
If we do, I will let you know that too. Thank you.
All right, and that motion, Mr. Oberst?
I propose we all go home, except we already are, so most of us anyway. So I would move adjournment.
All in favor, please
Second.
signify by saying aye.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, you guys, thank you again. Great work, really, really appreciate it. Have a great evening. We'll try our new format starting at our next meeting, and think we can move this along.